Hello, welcome to this video. This is on the poem Boat Stealing by William Wordsworth. It appears as poem 3 from the conflict section of the OCR anthology Towards a World Unknown. Well, before we get into the poem, let's have a quick think about the writer, the poet William Wordsworth, possibly the most famous of the Romantic poets. I'm just going to take my notes down to the bottom here so I can get a few notes about him in terms of biography. Now, we can't really talk about everything, it would take too long, and there are lots of good videos out there that you can have a look at that go into lots of detail about the history and about the biographical details of this poet. But because this poem is so long, we're just going to do a brief recap of some of the things about the Romantic era. So that's the first thing to get down. It's in the Romantic era. And the Romantic era was known for a love of nature. That's going to feature heavily in this poem. The power of nature, the beauty of nature. There is some kind of spiritual influences as well. And also we have this kind of the need, the tendency to express themselves in sort of basic language, the fact that it doesn't have to be flowery, superfluous language. It can just be basic language and it can still be beautiful. So there are lots of interesting metaphors and images in this poem. It's not boring, it's not just pointless and basic, but it has got a sort of a basic storytelling kind of flow to it. What else do we need to know about it? Well, there's something about setting in here that's very important. So the setting is a real place. It's a lake in the Lake District. Now this is where Wordsworth grew up. He was born and brought up there. He spent a lot of time in his childhood exploring the natural world of the Lake District. If you've ever been there, you know it's a place of outstanding natural beauty. It has special kind of protection status these days. And lots of people choose to go there on holiday. There's lots of lakes around there, hence the name. And this poem takes place on one of the lakes. I think it's the second largest lake that this incident takes place on. And he spent a lot of time wandering around the outdoors because he felt that he didn't have a very happy home life, and so nature helped Wordsworth to kind of find some peace, it seems, and it inspires a lot of his best-selling, well-known poetry. What else do we need to know about this poem? Well, we need to know a little bit about the form of the poem. I'm going to go back up to the title page here. We need to know a little bit about the form of the poem, and that's why I've highlighted this title here. So the form of the poem is an epic poem. Epic poems are usually concerned with grand adventures, with one sort of heightened event that shows off the heroics of its protagonist. And we can think about John Milton, we could think about Homer's Odyssey. They look like books, and in fact they're actually these enormous epic poems. And this is from, this boat stealing poem isn't actually a real poem, it's an extract from a larger poem. It says at the bottom, doesn't it? Actually, it doesn't say at the bottom. But it's from what's known as the prelude. And so it's almost like it's an extract from an intro to another larger poem. And all in all, it would take a very, very long time to go into that. So I'm not surprised that the exam board have just selected a small extract. And I say small, actually when you look at it on a page, look at how enormous it looks. It's so huge. And it's interesting to note that it wouldn't have been broken up into two separate sections. They've just done that to fit it all on one page. It would have been in just one long continuous stanza. There wouldn't have been the break that you see at the end of that first column of writing. They've just done it to fit it on the page. And I think it really overwhelms students, this poem. It's enormous, it's huge. It's about a very kind of obscure, strange event as well, that puts lots of students off, but I've enjoyed studying it, and I think that it's really, really worthwhile spending the time looking at it. I think we can break it into 3 parts. So if you wanted to break it up, I'm going to take the line down here at the bottom, and I think I would draw a sort of a dotted line just across underneath line 25. That's the first part of the poem. Remember, Wordsworth didn't break it up into 3 parts. We're just going to do that to help us understand and to help us break down the poem a little bit. The second break that I would make would be kind of sort of roughly in between these 2 areas here. There's a little break in the line, where are we? Line 38. I think that kind of works as a separate section there. This is section 2, and then at the bottom there we've got section 3. So you can see that section 1 is the biggest section of this poem. What are we going to do? Right, we're going to read the poem, and we're going to get the story of the poem outlined here for us, okay? So we're going to have a little think about what the story is of the poem. We know that Wordsworth's background is in the Lake District and it's all about nature. This poem is exactly about that, and the conflict is going to be very much the conflict between man and nature. There's also a little bit about the conflict between nature itself. So I'm going to write that in at the top there, just next to that word conflict, because sometimes nature is beautiful, nature's beauty, and sometimes nature is terrifying. So it's almost like that fear versus beauty in this poem. So there's a contrast between man and nature, there's a contrast between nature itself, and there is a conflict between the poet in sort of like an internal conflict as well. So I'm going to write that in. But I think this is sort of less obvious than the other 2. So we're going to get a sort of a story here, and I think we can probably bullet point it in 3 different ways, but let's read it through and just make sure we understand all the vocab. I went alone in a shepherd's boat, a skiff that to a willow tree was tied within a rocky cave, its usual home. So he's outlining here how that one night he went on his own, found a boat. This is what this word means, it just means a little boat. He found this little boat. He calls it a shepherd's boat, a skiff. It was tied up and it wasn't his own, hence the title stealing. He took it. The moon was up, the lake was shining clear among the hoary mountains from the shore. I pushed and struck the oars and struck again in cadence. Pause there. Now the hoary mountains, he's not having a go at women here, he's not being insulting towards women. The word hoary just means whitish. White, maybe grey as well, okay? So he's looking up at the sort of perhaps they're snow-topped mountains. I'm not sure. Perhaps it's just the stones that make them look white and kind of dusky in the night sky. So he's pushing off. He's pushing off from the shore, and he's looking back to the shore that he's just left. If you can imagine the little boat, I can't really draw the picture here from you, but if you can imagine the little boat, in order to travel in a forward direction, he's having to look this way. So he's having to look at the spot that he's just pushed off from. That's important. I think that's a really important thing to understand about this poem. And if you don't understand that, I'm going to put a little link in the description to a video that makes it really, really clear for you. So cadence, this is another word that perhaps we don't understand. It's just like a sequence of musical notes. A cadence is like a chord at the end of a song, and it sounds harmonious, it sounds finished. Okay, so cadence just meaning kind of like musical, sort of sort of like musical accompaniment. Sorry, that's not very clear there. But it's like he feels that the actions he's doing have a certain music towards them. Okay, so all really positive imagery to begin with. And my little boat moved on just like a man who walks with stately step. I think the boat is being personified as the man here, but I've heard other teachers say that he thinks he's a man, sort of taking this boat and having this grand adventure. But I think the boat moved on just like a man. It sounds like the boat is the thing that's being compared to the man, but we'll have a look at that in a bit. Who walks on through stately steps, though bent on speed. So he's going nice and fast, and he's rowing away from the shore. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure. Not without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still on either side small circles glittering idly in the moon, until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. So here, very, very simply, just describing how the boat is moving through the river, the lake, leaving behind her on either side. This is just the ripples that the oars are making, these circles here, as the boat and the oars power through the water. And it says in the moon, obviously this is the reflection of the moon, but it seems to him like he's having this amazing adventure. A rocky steep uprose above the cavern of the willow tree. So do you remember right at the start, it's tied up to this little cave, and above the cave there seems to be this mountain, a rocky steep, and we're going to call this mountain 1. Bear with me, that's going to be important in a second. A rocky steep uprose above the cavern of the willow tree, and now as suited one who proudly rode with his best skill, I fixed a steady view upon the top of that same craggy ridge. This is the same mountain. He makes the point here, like to really labour the point that we're not getting confused. This is mountain 1, this is the first mountain that just rises a little bit above the cave that he got the boat from. Okay, so he's fixing his view because he can only look backwards when he's rowing, and he fixes his view on this mountain. The same craggy ridge, the bound of the horizon. So this is the only thing that he can see at that point. That is the limit of what he can see, the bound of the horizon. You can only see to the horizon, and that's the limit from what he can see. For behind was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. That's all I could see behind, was just the night sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Now this is a word that you've probably not heard before, unless you've watched some videos on this. I had to look it up. A pinnace is like a sort of a sailboat. So she's gone from being a shepherd's boat, a little skiff. Now she's a pinnace, and it's not just an elfin, it's not just a pinnace, it's this elfin pinnace, and this has the sort of mystic qualities. Elfin, I kind of think of little fairies. It's sort of like magical creatures. I'm getting the idea of Narnia or something like that here. If you've ever read the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, I'm thinking about that kind of boat. 20 times I dipped my oars into the silent lake. Again, it's just describing how he's travelling through the lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. Then we get this dash that I think is really important. We'll come back to some of the punctuation perhaps in a bit if we have time. And this is the end of section 1, so a really positive section, an exciting adventure that this young boy, the poet, is having. When from behind that rocky steep, so behind mountain 1, till then the bound of the horizon, I thought, he's saying, that was the limit to what I could see. There was a huge cliff. So he's saying this smaller, this first mountain, this mountain 1 that we thought about up here, the rocky steep, the same craggy ridge, again the rocky steep, when from behind that rocky steep till then the bound of the horizon, the limit, I thought it was, this came out of that, a huge cliff, as if voluntary power instinct upreared its head. Okay, so again we've got some ideas here that perhaps he's having a bit of a shock. Up to this point, the young boy, William Wordsworth, has been completely in control of this boat. He's been having this exciting adventure, and then he sees a huge cliff appear that rises up and completely overpowers that first mountain that he saw. So how does he respond to that? The second part of this poem, this bit here up to about line 38, is his response, how he feels to that huge cliff, okay, when it uprears its head. So let's find out what happens when he sees it. I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the huge cliff rose up between me and the stars, and still with measured motion, like a living thing, strode after me. With trembling hands I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the cavern of the willow tree. There in her mooring place I left my bark. So this part here sort of brings that section to an end. And he sort of leaves his boat at the bottom, back where it was in the cavern of the willow tree, and heads home, and through the meadows homeward went with grave and serious thoughts. That's the end of his adventure, at the end of section 2. So what is his response to the huge cliff? What is his response to that? Well, he's startled, he's afraid, he's terrified. Okay, so he grows still firstly. He hasn't been still the whole poem, but now he's still. He's almost humbled by it. And it rose up, and he seems to think that it's kind of chasing after him. It strode after me, and it makes him tremble, it makes him hesitate. He's terrified by the fact that he didn't know the mountain was there all along, but as he pushes back and back and back and back and back from the shore, it grows and grows and grows. Now, it doesn't literally grow, it's a metaphor. Of course, it's always there. The mountain is always there. It's just that at first he can't see it because it's obscured by the smaller mountain. But just as he pushes back and back and back into the lake, that angle is changed, and he can somehow now see that huge cliff that completely terrifies him. He trembles, he spins the boat around, and then he goes back to the cavern of the willow tree, completely humbled by the power of nature. He leaves his little ship there, his little boat, and interestingly, we'll have a little point about this in a second, it's not an elfin pinnace anymore, it's just a piece of bark. He's completely humbled, and his boat is too, by the power of nature. And through the meadows homeward went with grave and serious thoughts. It's made him really kind of depressed to think about the fact that he's been caught out almost by the huge terrifying power of this mountain. It's not something that we can relate to easily, but I think it probably has the same impact that you perhaps feel when you see a really terrifying storm, something that nature does that is terrifying. That's his emotion here. So hang with it. Section 3, and after I had seen that spectacle, so when he's reflecting on it, for many days my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. So I was dwelling on it for ages after I saw it. I came home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. In my thoughts there was darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion, no familiar shapes of hourly objects, images of trees, of sea or skies, no colours of green fields. I couldn't think of anything else. All these other things that I took joy in, I used to take joy in with nature. I couldn't think of anything else except for but huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men moved slowly through my mind. All I could think about were these mighty forms kind of haunting me day and night. By day, and with the trouble of my dreams, it gave me nightmares. So a really basic reading of that poem would cause us to break the story into 3 parts. Try and keep these annotations as small as you can because we've got lots to write down. So firstly, the boy, I'm going to abbreviate Wordsworth, just WW. The boy, William Wordsworth, has an exciting adventure stealing a boat. Second part, his view changes as he travels to reveal a huge, put that in quote marks, cliff, which startles him. Thirdly, he feels intimidated and goes home depressed. Can't stop thinking about it. Hope that's clear. So the story of the poem is really, really basic, I think, and the language isn't too complex either, but I think there are lots and lots of complex ideas going through this poem. So firstly then, I'm not going to say everything about this video because this poem, because we're already up to 21 minutes now, and I'm not going to go over every single thing in terms of language and structure. It's important that we note it's in iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter is the 10 beats per line poetic form and structure that Shakespeare wrote his sonnets in. It was a sort of a well-known way to write a poem, and it gives it a certain rhythm. I went alone into a shepherd's boat, a skiff that to a willow tree was tied. It's the idea that the stress is on the second of those pairs of syllables all the way along. So there's 5 pairs of syllables per line, 10 syllables, and in each of those pairs the second of those syllables is stressed. You don't read it like that, I've just read it to emphasise it. I went alone into a shepherd's boat, but it kind of gives it that rhythm. So that's the first thing to say. Now when you're listening to a poem in iambic pentameter, when you have moments where that is interrupted, either by a full stop or a dash in the middle of the line, that kind of sounds strange to your ears, okay? And that's got a name in English, and that is caesura. So we're going to have a look at some of the moments of caesura in the poem. We're also going to have a look at different moments of personification that the poet uses, and we're going to have a look at a little bit later at some of the syntax in the poem. So firstly then, let's just quickly look at how he describes how caesura could be used for effect in here. It causes you to stop and reflect. This is a moment of caesura. I'm going to use my yellow colour because this is my structure colour, and caesura is a structural device. Okay, so we've got some caesura halfway through the poem here. We've got some caesura through the line of the poem here, and this is all in section 1. This is all in the first section. Okay, now the caesura here, spell that for you. The caesura here forces the reader, remember, don't just pick out caesura, you've got to have a reason why it's used. So it forces the reader to pause and think about what has just been said, and look at how beautiful the imagery is that comes exactly before the caesura. So imagery, language, it's bent on speed, it has troubled pleasure. It has look at this bit here, small circles glittering idly in the moon until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. The idyllic imagery immediately precedes the caesura, and it makes you pause and stop and think about these things. And he's almost kind of making the reader admire him. He seems to be full of pride here as well. And now as one suited, one who proudly rode with his best skill. He's suited to the task. He's proud of his skill. And I think we've got this lexical set of conceit here. It's almost like he is conceited. And this is called a lexical set, when the words combine together to give a certain connotation. He's creating this sense of pride, he's conceited, he's best adapted to this skill that he's performing. And so he seems he seems to be kind of making the reader, forcing the reader to admire him here as he takes on this adventure and task. And this ties into the form, the epic poem form, because if he's not a protagonist having an amazing epic journey, then we don't really feel invested in it. So we kind of have to feel invested in this first part of the poem. We have to feel that it's a really sort of adventurous, exciting moment in his life. And that's how he uses caesura and the idyllic imagery to really reinforce that epic poem. Another thing, just look at how he talks about his shepherd's boat. I'm going to use a different colour. You don't have to go crazy with the colours. At first, it's just a skiff. It's nothing to him. It's not something that he feels personally connected with at all. That, the determiner there, just kind of further distances his boat from him. So it's the effect is that he's sort of further distanced. It's just this random boat that he's found that to a willow tree was tied within a rocky cave, its usual home. Well, I don't really feel that connected to something that lives in a rocky cave and is tied up to a tree. But very, very quickly, if you have a little look, he actually begins to really connect with it. So he calls it my little boat. Already, it's changed pronoun. It was a shepherd's boat, and now it's my little boat. And I think he says it a bit further down as well. The voice of the last echoes moving on. He does say somewhere about a little bit further on, of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her. And now it's personified as a woman. So it's almost like the relationship between them is developing. He found a boat, he stole the boat, now it's my boat. Now it's almost like a woman that he's having this adventure with. And that continues on all the way down through the poem. It's really interesting. And this is kind of like the climax of the poem here. She was an elfin pinnace. Because she is helping him to have this adventure, she is suddenly promoted. Not just a shepherd's boat, not just a skiff, but something that is amazing and beautiful and magical and mystical. And again, using that female pronoun, she. But it doesn't all last for him and his little elfin boat. As we come down here, we can see I left my bark. It's almost like by being humbled by the giant cliff before him, he kind of feels a little bit distant now from his humble boat. All it is bare wood that's strapped together like a little raft. And that's when it kind of breaks down in terms of the relationship between them. Perhaps I'm reading too much into that, but I think that's a deliberate thing that Wordsworth is doing there. So we thought a little bit about the boat there. If we come back down to this section that we were just talking about as being the climax of this poem, the sort of the height of the drama. She was an elfin pinnace 20 times, I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. We're almost getting the climax, not just of the story, but also of the imagery. That lovely simile there, like a swan, graceful, beautiful. Again, serving to reinforce the beauty of nature all the way through, he seems to be torn. Is nature beautiful? Is it fearful? Is it something to be admired? Is it something to be terrified by? Well, right here, he's still in that admiring stage where he's admiring nature, I believe. But then we get this section here. This seems to be the sort of the climax of the writing. I just want you to have a quick look at the syntax. We don't usually look at sentence structure in poems, but this is a really important point. Okay, so we've got a little semicolon here, and if you have a look, we don't get a new sentence until here. That's a really lengthy sentence. And the poem, it's not the longest sentence in the poem, but it's a really important one. And as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. When? And I'm thinking, okay, what's going to happen? This is the part that I'm really interested in. When, what? This is the climax. So what is going to happen to disturb that moment of climatic idealism? What's going to happen? I really want to know. When, from behind that rocky steep? Yes, I'm hanging on, it's building the tension. Till then, the bound of the horizon. Well, this is repetition. I'm like, I already know it's the bound of the horizon. You've told me that already. I don't want to know. And again, it's serving to emphasise the tension. He's reminding you, I thought this was the limit, the first mounting, to what I could see. When, from behind that rocky steep, till then, the bound of the horizon. Look at that lovely embedded clause here. So the repetition combines with an embedded clause to further enhance that tension. A huge cliff. As if voluntary power instinct upreared its head. And we have to wait. We have to wait to find out what's happening. A huge cliff upreared its head. So we're forced to wait. Wordsworth really wants to kind of create that impact of that moment there. There's another time in this poem where sentence structure is used for effect. And it's down at the bottom here. If we have a look at the syntax of this final part here, look at how long this final sentence is. I'm scanning it, trying to find a full stop, but there isn't one. It's from there to there. It's an enormous sentence, and we have to look at that, and we have to try and question why it's so huge. And I think that there's really a couple of reasons for this. He seems maybe a bit muddled. I'm going to put compound, complex sentence. Okay, and again, this is a structural feature, so we'll highlight it. What's the effect of that muddled, of that compound complex sentence? Well, it's quite muddled. It's quite overwhelming. He can't quite gather his thoughts together after he sees that intimidating sight. Okay? But look at it down here. I cannot read this quickly if I try. I am forced to slow down. And there's something else that's happening here as well. In my thoughts there was darkness, call it solitude, or blank desertion, no familiar shapes of hourly objects, images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields, but huge and mighty forms that do not live like men moved slowly through my mind. Sometimes students pick out alliteration and say, oh, can I have some points? I've picked out some alliteration. Well done for picking out that this is alliteration, but there's no points in the exam for being able to identify techniques and just moving on. You have to be able to say what the effect is. The alliteration here is combining with the sentence structure to slow the reader down. Okay? And whenever you can find something in a poem that seems to combine two devices together, that's always the time to stop and spend a lot of time on those things, okay? That's a really good tip for your exam. The alliteration combines with the extended sentence to slow the reader down so that we're forced to have that same experience as Wordsworth. Let me say that again. We are forced to have the same experience as Wordsworth, that do not live like men moved slowly through my mind. It's like I'm kind of emphasising that, but I can't say that quickly. I have to say it slowly, and it's almost like I'm dragging myself through that penultimate line, and I'm getting his own experience there, that he's a bit depressed, that he feels like he's trudging through the day. So that's 2 points on sentence structure that perhaps not every student would write about. Quite a lot of people might write about this simile, like a swan, but not everybody would find something to say about the combined devices of repetition and embedded clauses, the combined devices of alliteration and extended sentence syntax. Sorry, I've written sentence. It's really important to find those little moments in poems like this. Now, this poem video is taking a really long time to do. There's so much more that we can find in here, so many more parts of this poem. I'm just going to finish with 1 or 2 other things, and if you've made it this far, very, very well done. You've done it extremely well to make it this far. And then we're going to sum up by looking at the message of the poem. Okay. So I'm going to have another look at this that really stands out to me. At the top, there's a moment here that Wordsworth is drawing our attention to. I pushed and struck the oars and struck again. This perhaps seems like the most basic, boring line in the poem. Of course, that's what you're going to do with a boat. You have to use the oars. But it's down here as well. Struck and struck again. There's no way that's an accident. There's no way that that's completely unintentional. There's an echo there, okay? There's an echo, and yet by using that same phrase, and it's not exactly the same, but there is the same kind of feeling to those lines. By using that same phrase, we're creating a bit of reflective imagery. And Wordsworth is forcing you back to the start of the poem. Now that reminds me of his own experience here. He is being forced by the huge cliff back to where he came from. And so that reflective imagery really gives me an idea of how Wordsworth is feeling. I feel like I've got so far. I feel like this poem has almost defeated me, but I've battled through all the way down here. I've got to here, and then I'm forced back to where I've come from, back to this line up here on, line 6. That's giving us the experience that Wordsworth had, okay? The idea that he's forced to go back to where he just came from. So I don't think that that's an accident that it's there, but you could think that it's got other meanings as well. It's absolutely fine. With such a huge, immense poem, it's impossible that we would agree on all the different renderings of these lines. And as I said, I could carry on doing this video all day. It's so rich in imagery, all over the place. But I'm hoping that you've got some form of I hope you got some form of what the poet is trying to say here. And if you are interested in having a bit more of a further study, we didn't have time today, but perhaps you could have a look at the personification that is used in this poem. He personifies nature, and there's a reason for that. So perhaps you could look through and find it for yourself. Well, the messages are really simple. The messages are that nature is both powerful yet beautiful. And so there's an almost like a kind of reverence for nature. At first, he feels that himself, he, the boy who steals the boat, he feels that he should be admired for his actions, his act of stealth, his act of skill. He feels that he should be admired. But by the end, he is reduced to this little boy with trembling hands, this trembling boy, just by the power of this mountain. So this is my, I'm sorry, this is getting really messy. This is my sort of two main messages that I've taken away from this poem. There are loads of other messages, and you can find lots of really helpful videos on YouTube to help you through this poem. But these have been my first two. Nature is both powerful yet beautiful. At first he thinks that he should be admired, but by the end he realises that nature is to be respected. That's a really kind of important message to get out of that. Okay, thanks for watching, thanks for following along, and I think we'll leave it there.